Well, Jacinda Ardern's crossed the ditch to talk trade and tourism with Australia. The Kiwi Prime Minister's mission to ensure we and the rest of the world know New Zealand is open for business after 2 years of hardline border closures. She visited Melbourne today ahead of a meeting with Anthony Albanese tomorrow.
And I caught up with the Kiwi Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, this afternoon. Prime Minister, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here.
Now, you're in the country trying to drum up trade and tourism through secret Kiwi travel agents, as they're called. It sounds a little suspicious. Who are these people?
Well, the idea there with it's a new Tourism New Zealand campaign. Those who have visited New Zealand, those who have enjoyed all of the hospitality we have to offer, the fact that you can get in such close proximity adventure and space and relaxation alongside our amazing cities with retail and food experiences. We're getting those people who've enjoyed that to go out and just, quietly spread the word, tell their friends, tell their families to come and visit New Zealand and share the experience that they've enjoyed.
We already claim a lot of the best Kiwis as our own here in Australia. Are you worried this might just encourage us?
Just yesterday, someone tried to claim Sam Neill as an Australian. I was absolutely outraged. I just can't imagine. It's this expansion that I see going on.
I'm sure you recall that our last PM worked for Tourism NZ for a while. He's kind of out of a job. Would you like to have him back?
Oh, our marketing campaigns are solid. So
That was a very brief response, Prime Minister.
We're good.
On a serious note, though, this challenge you face in getting people back to NZ, is it part due to the long and hard lockdowns? Is this a consequence of that approach?
No, I think actually it's not. That's not particularly the issue here. I mean, there's no shortage of people who are keen to visit. I've just come back from a trip into Europe promoting trade and tourism in New Zealand. And there's a huge amount of enthusiasm. Really, it's now just a matter of people turning their dreams and their aspirations into bookings.
You have been taking advantage of New Zealand's newly opened borders, though. You visited the States, Europe, you've been to the NATO summit. There has been a strong response from China to some of what you've done and said. State media there has accused you of demonising China in the Asia Pacific. Have you been?
Well, not at all. And in fact, one of the points that I've been making is that China has been present in the Pacific for a long time. There's been a lot of commentary about China in the Pacific. As I say, they have been there as often aid and development partners for a number of years. I think the only point that we're making is that for all of the engagement that we see, be it from China or be it from France or be it from the UK or the EU generally, we actually take a country neutral response on engagement. We ask for the same thing though, and that same thing is to make sure that the priorities are Pacific based, that it's free from coercion, that we have high quality investment in our region, and that you see that collaborative working. And when it comes to issues around militarisation, of course, that's not something our region wants. But we would say that and have been saying that to all and any partner in our part of the world.
But Australia and New Zealand have been the traditional partners for the Pacific, particularly on economics and security. Have we taken our eyes off the ball, allowing a pathway in for China?
I think that actually diminishes the sovereignty of our Pacific nations. I mean, that idea, these are sovereign nations. They're going to determine their own relationships. And yes, New Zealand and Australia have been present for a number of years. And of course, in New Zealand, we consider ourselves of the Pacific. We need to keep being present to respond to the challenges our region has, and actually the number one of which, named by our Pacific partners, over and above everything else, is climate change. So let's keep up the ambition alongside our Pacific neighbours, do our bit, but not because of anyone else, but because it's our region and it's our obligation to be acting on those massive challenges. That shouldn't be driven by anyone, but by necessity.
In London this week, I heard you say it was all about diplomacy, that you've got to exhaust that before anything else. Is that approach right in this more aggressive global landscape?
Well, if the alternative is an arms race, then yes, we would come back to diplomacy as our central tenet for what we should be driving at this particular point in time. And if you take a look at the war that we're seeing in Europe don't think anyone would want the legacy of the war in Ukraine to, for instance, be greater proliferation of nuclear weapons. And we're at a juncture right now where I think it is important for those countries who take a very strong stance on issues like nuclear weapons, as New Zealand does, to make sure that that is being elevated on the world stage.
Australia now has a new government, a Labor government. Does that government make the relations between our two countries any easier?
Well, it is fair to say that there'll be some individuals that are already known to their counterparts in New Zealand, because as you can imagine, there is contact between the Labor Party and the Labor movements, and yeah, that does make those first engagements a little bit different, a little bit easier. But our jobs on both sides, regardless of who's in government in either country, New Zealand and Australia's relationship will always be strong.
You clearly get along pretty well with our new PM. Have you had any advice for Albo on being a new PM?
I was about to strangely liken it to being pregnant. When you're pregnant, you don't need someone to come and tell you about the pain of birth. It's a bit like when you become a new Prime Minister. No one needs to hear about it.
Speaking of diplomatic issues, we saw a recent handshake between yourself and the UK PM Boris Johnson in London this week. It's being described as the most violent handshake ever. So is your arm okay?
Do you know, I'm being very honest here. I actually didn't particularly notice until someone sent in a recording of it, and I can see why it looked like I might have needed a workplace injury claim as a result. But I can tell I'm actually fine, and at the time it seemed normal.
Great to hear. Jacinda Ardern, good to talk to you again. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thanks very much.